Hello, welcome to another episode of the Intel with Greg Cosell, brought to you by Inside the Birds. I'm Geoff Mosher from Inside the Birds, alongside with Adam Caplan. And with us, as always, is the star of the show, Greg Cosell, to provide us with some intel on this episode. Specifically, we're going to talk about the linemen, defensive tackles, defensive ends, pass rushers, and get into a good conversation about that. And Greg, the way we always start it off, right? We always ask you about what the Eagles are doing schematically to what they're looking for. And I feel like there's a little bit of an I don't know here as we go in to talk about defensive ends specifically, because now that Adam and I talked about this on the pod that came out Monday morning, now that they have a pass rusher from the strong side linebacker and Hassan Reddick, who we assume will stay on the field and be more of a defensive end when they rush the passer. If you have Reddick and, say, Josh Sweat as your defensive ends, and you have Fletcher Cox and Hargrave as your defensive tackles, what are they looking for out of their next rookie defensive end pass rusher? Is it another person that plays who can stand up and play the Reddick role, or is it someone who's going to eventually fill the role that has been occupied by Derek Barnett and and Brandon Graham and some of the guys who probably aren't going to be on the team beyond this year? So that's a lot of questions and a long way of me telling you that I feel like scheme that they're playing now is a lot different from how we evaluated guys for Jim Schwartz, and it opens up a lot of questions as to what the Eagles are looking for.
Yeah, I mean, it's an unanswerable, but I mean, you would have to assume in their sub fronts that the edge rushers are going to be Sweat and Reddick, Brandon Graham being the total unknown at this point. Mm-hmm. But, Reddick is a pass rusher. Now, we know in their base front, assuming they do what they did a year ago, Geoff, that Reddick's going to be that stand-up, outside, strong side backer, the role that Avery played a year ago, that's what Reddick would be in base. But at his core, he's an edge pass rusher. So Sweat and Hassan Reddick would be the edge pass rushers. Now, they still have Derek Barnett. He was re-signed. Now, let's remember one thing. We are now talking today on April 11th. We have no idea who makes the roster and who doesn't make the roster. Just because a player is signed in March or April, particularly a veteran player, does not automatically mean they make the roster. But you'd have to believe, because Reddick is going to make the roster, and so is Josh Sweat, that they will be the edge pass rushers when they play nickel or dime, whatever it turns out to be. So then you assume inside it would be Cox, it would be Hargrave, it would be Milton Williams, it would be some version of that.
Right.
And
Brandon Graham has also moved inside
tackles today, but it would seem that this is an area of strength for the team. Now, the flip side of that is most coaches will say you never have enough pass rushers, just like they'll say you never have enough corners. Right. So if there's someone they really like that's there when they're picking whatever round, who knows? You just don't know. But it would seem that they're relatively set at those positions.
Greg, let's get started at D tackle. And one of the guys is just so intriguing, because I know you've seen the Georgia players. What a group of players they've got. Travon Walker, when you look at Walker's tape, is he a guy you could see lining up like he did in college at the end and D tackle? Is he better at one position or another? What did the tape show you?
Yeah, Travon Walker is a really good prospect. He's not at this point coming out a pure edge rusher. I think he can be that down the road. I think he knows how to use his hands. He's got heavy hands, and he had multiple moves when he did line up as an edge rusher: swipe, club, dip, rip, one-arm stab. He has a feel for rushing, but at this point, he does not come out as a true dominant edge rusher. He played both outside and inside. He gives you that versatility for however you would like to use him. I think that there's a lot to unlock with him as a pure edge player if you choose to use him that way. But he's big, he's long, he's 6'5", he's 272. His arm length is off the charts, which a lot of people look at, as you well know. Amazingly, whatever it means, he ran a 4.51, which is ridiculous for a 6'5", 272-pound man. So I think he's a really good prospect. I just, based on what he did at Georgia, I'd be hesitant to say he's a pure edge rusher, but I think with coaching and experience, he could develop into at least a quality edge rusher.
Does Georgia play similarly with a linebacker on the line of scrimmage so that a guy like Walker is accustomed to another body next to him?
Well, he does when he plays D tackle, but not when he
Right.
plays D end. No, Georgia does not normally play that way. No, they don't have
Okay.
a front look like the Eagles.
But because he's played tackle, he is kind of accustomed to another body
Without question.
alongside of him,
Yeah,
which is different. Right.
I don't
Right.
have a breakdown, Geoff, in front of me, but he played significant snaps at both. He was not a one-position player.
Right.
And the one thing Georgia does do is they play multiple fronts. So all their, with very few exceptions, Jordan Davis is probably the exception, but everybody else pretty much lines up in different positions along their multiple defensive fronts.
Greg, for teams like the Giants and the Falcons who run a 34 front, could he fit in that front? Because I know he's long, but he's not exactly wide. How would he line up in a 34 front?
I don't think he'd be an outside backer in a 34 is essentially a 5-2. I don't think he'd be an outside backer. He'd probably be a 5 technique, meaning he'd be a defensive end. That would be my guess if you draft him to play in that particular front as your base. That's what I think he would be in that front.
Gotcha.
See, that's why I was trying to project for the Eagles. This is not the type of player who they ordinarily, you would think. I mean, not in their history under Jim Schwartz that they would prioritize, because they always look for that explosive edge burst guy who didn't have to worry about somebody being on his outside shoulder. Right now, he seemingly would fit that defensive end role in the 5-2 front. But what happens with Travon Walker on third down, or when you want to rush the passer and you have Sweat and Reddick out there, you essentially then have to play him inside.
See, I mean, if Travon Walker was the Eagles' pick, to me, you would see him in the role that Sweat played a year ago, where he moved inside in your base. And because I would like to see Sweat be on the outside, but that's me.
Agree.
And you'd probably see Walker, if he was good enough as a rookie, play snaps inside in your sub.
Gotcha.
But I don't think Walker would be the wide 9 defensive end in your base. To me, that's
Correct.
Josh Sweat.
Right. Okay. So that's again, that shows you a big difference in philosophy now on what the Eagles might be looking for out of their pass rushers, out of their linemen. And certainly some guys we might talk about who are defensive end, Greg, if they have the ability to stand up and rush the passer, we'll get into that. You might look at them as a successor to Hassan Reddick, or if Reddick were to get hurt, you could put a rookie, stand him up, and have him play the same position as well. So we'll get into
Walker's
that in a minute.
Not that guy.
No, Walker is not that guy, right? So we've established that. Let's talk about the two other kids from Georgia, because they're different. We've got Jordan Davis and Devontae Wyatt. So give me a breakdown in both of those and what schemes they best fit in.
Well, we'll start with Jordan Davis. Jordan Davis only played about 20 snaps a game for Georgia this year. Jordan Davis, there's no mystery to Davis. He's a base defensive tackle, which raises a fascinating question, one that is unanswerable, but I love thinking about this stuff, is what's the value of Jordan Davis in today's NFL if he's a base defense D tackle? Now, there's also a really important distinction to be made about Jordan Davis, and I think this is absolutely critical in any evaluation of him. There is a difference between strength and power. Those are two different traits. Davis is a strength player, meaning he can control and dominate an area. Power is strength with movement, velocity, force. Davis does not do that well. So he's a strength player, but not a power player. It's a really important distinction that people need to be aware of. So his game is built on strength. Right. And keep in mind, he did not play on third down in passing situations for Georgia. So obviously the coaching staff did not believe he was either, one, a good pass rusher, or as good as the other guys they put out there to rush the quarterback. So you have to decide what his value is. He's really good at what he does, playing a strength game in the middle of your defense. That's what he's really good at.
Boy, if you're a team that's picking in the top 10, how do you take a guy that's not going to have the impact on 3 downs? I just don't see it. We'll see where he goes. I'm sure
I would
he'll go in the
extend
upper
that
half.
to top 20. I don't, in
Yeah.
this day and age,
Yeah,
there's so many
sure.
good pass rushers in this draft. Why would you take a part-time player in the first round?
Yeah, it's not good. Not good.
So again, that's a great conversation, and there's no answer. But all I'm telling you is what he is. And
Right.
he played 20 snaps a game for Georgia.
That's and as you always say, that the tape tells you something. They're telling you that they didn't think he could play more than that, and obviously, if you're an NFL team that likes him, you have to find out why. And obviously, they know why because they've talked their scouts.
Right.
NFL
Teams know why.
Yeah,
the question
they'll
is,
find
where do
out.
you draft them?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting. We'll see where he goes. Yeah, it's a good one.
Well, it's
Good
also
one.
fascinating that he shed some pounds before the combine and, tested off the charts athletically. I imagine he's trying to show people he's got a little more burst than maybe what appeared on tape, Greg. But
Right.
you watch tape more than anyone. That it's not just about your girth or your weight. I mean, there's your pass rush is about your not your burst, your hand usage, your leverage, your pad leverage, and things like that. I mean, when you watch him, you clearly saw a guy who. Let me ask you: when he was in a position to rush the passer,
He's a ball rusher.
does he have
there
anything?
were snaps in which he walked back an offensive center into the quarterback. Not a lot of those snaps, but that's what he did. He's not unathletic. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying he's a big stiff. All I'm saying is that he's a control and area player. That's what he does. He's really good at that. He can control an area. He can play off that block and then make a tackle.
Do you have a good NFL comp for that kind of player, Greg?
I don't think he's a Lottie Noda. But I think that some people might think that. I thought Nada was more sounds crazy to say because he ran a 4.78, Davis, but I think Nada as a player was, maybe that comp is fair.
I think that sounds right. Okay.
You wonder, and Nada was a first-round pick, and again, then you would wonder about Nada today. Would he be a first-round pick? I'll give you an example. Davis is not as athletic as Vita Vea.
There you go.
Vita Vea lines up at times at Tampa as a wide 9 defensive end. Davis cannot do that.
Wow.
That is crazy.
Wow.
Yeah.
And Jordan Davis, by the way, folks, 6'6" and 3/8, over 340 at the combine. Some of the biggest hands for this draft at 10 3/4. Arm length is great. So he's got the measurables, but what really bothers me is what Greg pointed out. If you're a part-time player at the collegiate level, yes, they've got a lot of talent defense, but you're not there on nickel or dime or particularly nickel. That's not good.
Yeah, not in a league where you need to rush the passer. Nope.
Yeah.
All right, so Devontae Wyatt, Greg.
Yeah, Devontae Wyatt. I had to watch a lot of Devontae Wyatt. He was a tough guy for me to get a handle on. He showed flashes of really good play both against the run and a pass rusher, but he did not have jump off the film traits. Like I would say he was neither high level explosive nor exceedingly strong, even though he showed a flash here and there of both. He did not show the kind of pass rush traits that lead you to believe he can be an above the line interior pass rusher in the NFL at this point. He's not a long player. He's under 6'3", he does not have long arms. He does not have elite interior burst and explosiveness. So you saw flashes. I think he'll start his NFL career as a base defensive tackle. I think that there's enough there that you could see him down the road being a 3-down D tackle. I don't think that's the way it'll start, though. So there's something there. I just don't think you see it enough. At his absolute best, I think there are some similarities to Javon Hargrave, but that would be at his absolute best when you take those plays that are really good.
Interesting.
A guy that really did well at the Senior Bowl, and every once in a while, UConn has a player you go, "Oh wow, this guy might make
Yeah, I
it." And
didn't
this
see
one is,
him, Adam.
oh, you haven't seen Travis Jones? Okay, we'll
No.
get to him. We'll get to him another time. How about Mafe from Minnesota?
I've seen him, but he's more of a defensive end.
Oh, could he play? Could he play both, or you think he's more of an end?
I
If
mean, I
anything, he
think
might also be a like he could maybe be a stand-up Sam more than a D tackle, right? I would think.
I mean, what he did at Minnesota was he almost always lined up on the ball, on the edge to the boundary side of the field. That's what he did. Now, there were sub-front snaps in which he aligned a 3 technique and 4-eye inside in sub-fronts. But I don't think he's a defensive tackle in a strict sense. Like in a base defense, he's not Fletcher Cox or Javon Hargrave.
Right.
He's not going to be that guy. You might do that with him in a sub-front. He's a really interesting player because he's an interesting combination of athletic but a little stiff. He's a really good run defender. He plays the run with commitment, physicality. He knows how to set the edge. He knows how to play off blocks. When he went up against tight ends, he just dominated them. He's explosive off the ball as a pass rusher, and he could immediately challenge the high side of offensive tackles, but he doesn't really have a plan at this point of how to rush the quarterback. So you didn't really see moves and counters. So another guy, he's tantalizing at times. He shows flashes, but there were too many frustrating pass rush reps where he just got stopped literally right before he got to the top of the pass rush arc, and he had no answers. So he's a little bit of a work in progress.
Over 260.
Coaching, he needs work.
Yeah, it seems like the athleticism is all there, but raw.
Yeah, he's very raw, and there is some tightness to him, but he is explosive coming off the ball.
Is there a little bit of a comp to Owe from Penn State last year coming out?
Owe
just as
was
far
a little no, I wouldn't call Mafe freaky, and I thought Owe was a little freaky.
Oh, as far as that being an athlete, freakish athleticism. Okay. Getting back real quick to the Georgia kids, Greg, because I always have this concern. There's so much talent there in the front seven, if you want to include all the linebackers too, that when you watch the tape, is it hard to determine sometimes whether one guy benefits more from the talent around him than another? I mean, it seemed like clear that you liked Walker's tape the most out of all 3 linemen. But when you watched it, are you able to decipher in a defense that good if maybe somebody's a little bit more elite than somebody else, but somebody else is benefiting from being around so much talent?
Well, just so people understand, I don't do it that way, Geoff. I mean, I watch. First of all, I had to make 4 runs through Georgia's defense. So I watched Georgia's defense probably like 6 games, 4 different times because they had 8 guys.
Right.
You can't watch 8 guys at one time.
Right.
You can't watch 4 guys at one time if you want to do it right. So I went through Georgia's defense 4 times. So I'm looking at individuals. I start with what are they being asked to do?
Mm-hmm.
And then how do they do it? What are their traits, attributes, characteristics? But you got to know what they're being asked to do. Because I tend to believe, based on my experience doing this a long time, that coaches kind of know what they're doing. I know a lot of fans sometimes don't think that, but I tend to believe coaches, when they're with players every single day and they do this for a living, that they kind of know what they're doing.
Right.
So if they're asking a guy to do something, I got to believe they think they can do that well. And if you don't see a guy do something, it doesn't mean he can't do it. It's just you don't see it.
Right.
So then you have to make a projection, which, by the way, teams do too. But teams get a chance to work guys out, pro days, individual workouts that I don't do. So I would never say a guy can't do something unless his body, his traits, physical traits, in my view, would not allow him to do that.
Right.
I mean, hey, I'm not going to run a 4.4 no matter what I do. So my body's not going to do that. So sometimes you can see with a guy, he's not going to be able to do certain things.
Right.
So when I watch Georgia's players, I try to put all that together when I watch any players on defense, which is why you have to watch full games, because you can't just watch highlights of their good plays, because you could put up the 25 best plays of the top 50 defenders in this league and they all look like Hall of Famers.
Right.
But you have to watch the games.
Yeah, it's true.
Okay.
Let's continue with D tackle here. And I know you've seen Oklahoma tape, and
I have.
Winfrey, his length, Greg, I mean, this is what you dream of if you're a defensive line coach. But what does his tape look like?
Yeah, I liked his tape. He grew on me the more I watched him. He's really long. I mean, his arms are really long. He's athletic. He was predominantly used through the early part of the season pretty much as a nose tackle. I mean, he played 0 technique, 1 technique. Then as the season progressed, he played more 3 technique. And I think that he can transition to the NFL as a 3 technique. He is a good athlete. Early part of the season, you saw strength and power, strong, heavy hands. He controlled and displaced offensive linemen in the run game. And when he rushed the quarterback, it was a bull rush. As the season progressed, I thought he showed much more movement and range. His feet looked lighter and quicker. I really thought he was an improving player as the season progressed. And I think that he showed higher level 3 technique traits. And I think he can be a 3 technique in this league for sure as he continues to develop.
Does he have any other positional versatility as we talked about with the Eagles defense?
He played the 0, the 1, 2-eye, 2 technique, 3 technique. There were snaps. He did line up wide, but I don't know if ultimately, that's what you would use him to do. But I like Perry and Winfrey's game a lot.
Right.
He was a junior college kid. He was a top 5 recruit when he came out of JUCO. He chose Oklahoma over the SEC. I think he's a really strong prospect.
Yeah, of course, was the Senior Bowl MVP, if I'm not mistaken, of the game.
I like him. His arms are 35 1/4. That's really long arms.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you about a Texas guy, DeMarvin Leal from A&M.
I watched him too.
Good, because I kind of looked at him and wondered, does he have that kind of versatility also, where he could play in an Eagles front, both the first and second down and the third down rush the passer in different alignments? Does he have that ability?
Leal was fascinating for me to watch because I watched him last summer from 2020, and I really liked him. Really liked him. And then I watched his tape this year, and I just didn't see – he didn't execute the traits that he has with the same consistency that he did in his 2020 tape. So the traits are there. I mean, here's what I wrote after last year. I said, Leal showed the kinds of flashes in 2020 that will get D-line coaches excited with strong, active hands and quick athletic feet to both control and displace O-linemen in the run game and rush the quarterback off the edge with a desirable combination of quickness and power. He's an excellent overall athlete for a 290-pound D lineman. I guess he came in at 283 at the combine, with natural quickness and flexibility to his movement. He didn't show that as much in this season, but the traits are there. I think he has a tendency to play a little high. And when you play high, you lose all your traits. So I'm not sure. I think he could end up being a really good player, or he could not be. And I don't know the answer to that. But he's got really strong traits when they show up.
How would he fit in the Eagles defense? Where would you see him potentially aligned?
Probably inside. That would be, I think, his best spot. But that would be my guess.
How about a guy that we actually had on NFL radio about a month or so ago, Neil Farrell from LSU? Have you seen him?
Yeah.
What do you think?
Love him. I think he's being totally overlooked.
Like it. Good.
Totally overlooked. I think that this kid is really a strong prospect. I think that he could play in even fronts, odd fronts. He can be a 1-gap player. He can be a 2-gap player. He has really good quickness off the snap to penetrate gaps. He has heavy hands and strength to control and displace interior alignment. I think that he played off blocks really well in the run game. I think that he showed enough to believe that down the road he can be a 3-down player and rush the quarterback from the inside. So I really like Neil Farrell. I don't know why he's not being talked about. He's got really good length. He's got play strength. He's got heavy hands. He moves well. He's the kind of guy to me that it would not surprise me for a second if he's a day 2 pick.
That's heady praise there. All right, Neil Farrell, now on the radar. Want to get into some edge rushers, but real quick, let's finish off the interior.
There's one
guys.
more guy I think that's worth mentioning.
Yeah,
go ahead.
That's
Is it
Matthew
Butler or Mathis? Go ahead.
Oh, Mathis is worth mentioning too, but Mathis is actually a really good prospect.
Yeah,
but again,
both.
with Alabama, they just put out prospect after prospect. He's another guy that I think Mathis, that as it goes down the road, he'll be a 3-down player. But right now, he's really good inside. He played in multiple fronts because Nick Saban does that. So he's got the versatility to play in multiple fronts and line up anywhere. Mathis is just a really good prospect. But Matthew Butler is fascinating to me, the Tennessee kid. Didn't know anything about him. He played the extra year at Tennessee due to COVID. Now, this guy, I could make the argument that he plays with more power and strength than Davis. This kid, you just turn on the tape in the SEC, and he was just throwing offensive linemen away. I mean, he controlled and displaced offensive linemen at the point of attack. It showed up in every single game. He could stalemate double teams. He could defeat double teams and then find the football. He's got pretty long arms, not super long arms, but pretty long arms. I thought he was one of the best interior D-line prospects in this draft class. He's got length, strength, explosive power, violent hands, lateral quickness. He made plays on the move. He's just not a pass rusher at this point in time. Whether he ever gets there remains to be seen, but he's not now. I really liked his tape a lot.
Sounds like a great day 2 type prospect, but if he can increase his pass rush,
and he played with tremendous effort. The term I always use is outstanding playing personality.
Good stuff. All right, on to the edge rushers. We'll talk about the Michigan guys. Aiden Hutchinson, and we'll throw David Ojabo in there. Obviously, a little bit different. We know Ojabo got hurt.
Hutchinson won't be there when the Eagles pick.
Yep, yeah. Hutchinson will not be there. Although now there's this buzz that Travon Walker might be the number 1 overall pick to the Jags. So we'll see. But I agree with you. Hutchinson will not be there. But how do you compare and contrast these two pass rushers from Michigan?
Hutchinson and Ojabo?
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, Ojabo won't play this year, which is
pre-injury.
Yeah, right.
Assuming he comes back and he's the same guy. Ojabo is just a far more explosive athlete than Hutchinson. I mean, it's clear as a bell when you put on the tape. Hutchinson's a really good prospect, though. But Ojabo he has high-level traits to rush the quarterback off the edge, and that's always in demand. I mean, the one thing he can do that, for instance, Kayvon Thibodeaux can't do is Ojabo can flatten at the top of his rush arc. Thibodeaux cannot flatten his rush path. Ojabo can, and that's what you need to do if you're going to win off the edge, win off the high side, I should say. He had tremendous burst off the edge. He immediately challenged offensive tackles to the outside, to the high side. He often forced them to open up to the sideline early in their sets, and that breaks down their technique and puts them in reactive recovery mode right away. Ojabo is just a sudden, explosive mover. You know who Ojabo reminded me of? Robert Quinn coming out of North Carolina.
Good one. Okay.
I thought that he was very similar. Same height, with Quinn being a little heavier when he came out. Arm length and vertical jump, very similar. And then you want to talk about Hutchinson?
Yep.
Yeah. Hutchinson is it's about play strength. It's about short area quickness and burst. He's always coordinated. Hands, hips, feet. That's his game. And as Adam knows from being on a different call, and I called Adam right after and said, boy, they were reading my notes. He has a rush plan that is so evident when you watch his tape. Everybody he played against, it was a 4-quarter game. He knew how to attack the offensive tackle he was playing against. That's very rare to see in a college player. He had a plan. You see, he's a guy you could watch his tape and you knew he loved the process of preparation.
Wow. It's
So
interesting.
it's like you have a technician and an athlete.
He's not special, as a true, because he's not a sudden or twitchy guy.
He's not Miles
Garrett.
Garrett.
He's got the core flexibility and bend you'd ideally like to see, and his arm length will be a concern for some. It's very short for almost a 6'7" player. There will be concerns about him, but you can tell the kid loves the whole process of what it takes to become a really good football player.
Nice. Well, it's interesting. It's because it sounds like he's pro ready and advanced. It sounds like you feel like Ojabo right now is just an athletic freak of nature with what he can do, and maybe has a higher
more
upside
than that, but he needs work. But unfortunately, because of the Achilles, that's the biggest shame of all.
That is the biggest shame,
and totally needless. The from talking to the personal people who were there, there was no need for him to do those drills.
Right.
It's a shame.
Yeah,
because that's a bad injury. I mean,
it is.
There's no guarantees with that injury.
Yep. Greg, one guy who's had a tremendous offseason, saw him at the Senior Bowl, blew it up the combine. A couple things there. Jermaine Johnson of Florida State. First of all, you see him as a linebacker, DN, both. What did you think of his tape?
Well, he lined up on the edge on both sides of the defensive front, took some snaps inside and sub fronts, stood up at times, put his hand on the ground at times. He had some really fun tape to watch because he had a lot of snaps against North Carolina State left tackle Ike Ekwonu, and he beat Ekwonu a number of times. So there was some really good tape to watch of him. I like Johnson. He's kind of got a wiry body, very sinewy, but he played stronger than what his body type looks like. He's got really long arms. He's athletic. I mean, his 10-yard split in the 40-yard dash was better than some receivers. I think Johnson down the road is going to be a really good edge pass rusher. I wouldn't say that he's a natural bender, but he can bend a little, enough where I think that can continue to improve. He's a really good run player right now. So I like Johnson a lot. He's a transfer from Georgia because he wanted to play every snap, which he was not going to do at Georgia. And I just think to me, he's a really good prospect.
Is he a defensive end for the Eagles, or is he someone that they could theoretically work into the Sam position where you stand him up and you have him doing basically what Hassan Reddick's going to do?
He could do that for sure.
Mm-hmm. It's always interesting,
but he can stand up for sure.
It's really interesting, and Adam, we'll probably talk about this more in the pod. I mean, if Hassan Reddick gets hurt, if he has to miss 2 or 3 games, what do the Eagles do? They didn't bring back Jannard Avery. He signed with somebody else. And then Patrick Johnson was a very low round pick last year. And he's supposed to be such a big part of their pass rush, but also that on the line guy for first and second. I always wonder, are they looking for somebody in this draft that can be a defensive end when you need to be a defensive end, but also can be a Hassan Reddick type if they need someone to fill in Hassan Reddick's role if he gets hurt?
Yeah, I think Johnson could do that for sure because he's a very good run defender. He's long. He's athletic. You can develop him into a pass rusher, a really good pass rusher. I mean, he had some pass rush moves. I mean, I like Johnson. I think he'll be a really good player down the road.
Let's go back to Kayvon Thibodeaux. Give me a breakdown of him because it sounded like you were suggesting that for a defensive end, maybe he's lacking a little bit in the area of bend or you said flattening. So at one point, this guy was considered the number 1 overall pick. This was like going back last year at this time or after the draft. Like, this is the guy to watch. What do you see in him?
Well, I think Thibodeaux has certain strong traits. I mean, I think that his game, he's got really quick get off. He can explode off the ball with initial balance and body control. He's got a sudden and powerful burst off the ball. He was at his best as a pass rusher when he was first off the ball, which is what you always like your pass rushers to be. I think he's more of a power player than he is an athletic bender. He's got powerful heavy hands. He can rush speed to power. But as I mentioned a moment ago, he does not have the desired bend and flexibility. He's got lower body stiffness. So he can't flatten his rush path when he clears the arc. When he clears the high side, the arc as they call it, he can't flatten his rush path the way you want it to be. So he doesn't have that bend, burst, and closing speed to the quarterback. That's not his game. In some ways, and he weighs less, but he kind of reminded me of Jadeveon Clowney, who couldn't do that either. They're both really strong players. That's how they play. And Clowney's made his name in this league moving inside. You talk to the people in Cleveland, and they'll tell you that's where he rushed the quarterback best. And most teams have found that out, as Clowney will be with his fifth team at age 28. So Thibodeaux in some ways reminded me of Clowney. I could see him inside and sub fronts just as Clowney has done successfully in his career.
Greg, we'll move on to a guy that I believe will go in the first round. I have no idea where he'll go. It's George Karlaftis from Purdue. What do you think of his tape?
Yeah, he was an interesting guy to watch for this reason. First of all, he was a state shot put champion in Indiana in high school. So his upper body and his hands, and they're very calculated in their usage. He's very good with this. His upper body and his hands are so strong. And he's another guy that has a nuanced feel for how to attack offensive tackles. He's got a plan. He thinks the game. The problem with Karlaftis is his lower body can't support his upper body. His lower body is stiff and not particularly athletic. So he does all this really good work with his upper body, and sometimes he just gets stuck. There were times where he did really good work, and then his feet stopped. And you can't stop in the NFL as a pass rusher. So he can beat guys with his power, his strength, his rush plan, although he's much more of a face-up rusher than a bender. He's not a bender. He's kind of compact and tight in his movement. He's very explosive in a confined space area, and that's what we mean by a face-up pass rusher. But I just worry about his lower body and then the ability to make that secondary move, which requires that kind of flexibility and fluidity that he doesn't quite have.
Interesting. That sounds like that might specifically be an issue against some of the really good OTs in the league. The smart offensive tackles, the ones who know how to play with great leverage, to be able to wall off a guy like that who's so strong above but not maybe twitchy below.
Yeah. So again, he's probably a guy you'd love to have in your D-line room. But I just don't know if he's, I don't know. He's maybe it'll all work out, because I'll tell you what, he is. The fact that he has a plan says a lot. I mean, he's another guy. Some people might look at him and think he's better off moving inside and being a defensive tackle, maybe even full time.
Right.
Which is very possible. It's I could see people thinking of him that way. The guy he kind of reminded me of to some degree. And this guy put up big time sack numbers in college, but he's not really that guy in the NFL, but he's a good player. He's just not a pure edge player, and that's Emmanuel Ogbah.
That's an interesting one. Okay.
Just got paid again. Yeah.
Yeah. But definitely.
He's not a pure edge rusher.
Right. Doesn't put big numbers. Right.
How about the kid at Penn State? He transferred him from Temple, I believe. Arnold Ebiketie.
Hey, come on. Don't. You said that with like a bad tone in your voice.
No, not at all. No disrespect to Temple, just because Adam's here with us. I just said he transferred from Temple.
Man.
Ebiketie, Arnold E.
I bet they don't call him Arnie. What do you think?
They probably just call him AE, I would think.
Yeah. He's got traits. His issue now is he doesn't really know how to rush the quarterback yet. All he does is attack the high side. He looked so much taller on tape than 6'2" and 3/8. I was kind of blown away by 6'2" and 3/8 because he looked like he was 6'4". Now he can bend. He can clear the arc and flatten. He can close with burst and speed. He can use his hands a little bit. He had a really nice one-arm stab and an underneath rip move. There's much to unleash with this kid. I think he has to get stronger at the point of attack in the run game, but there's some power to him. I would think he'd start his career as a sub front edge pass rusher and then develop into a full-time player. He, to me, struck me as a 5-2 front guy. Guy who plays outside in a 5-2 front.
So like a stand-up rusher like Hassan Reddick.
Yeah.
Okay.
And there's so much 5-2 front now being played in the league.
Right. Interesting.
Let's go back to Oklahoma. How about Nick Bonetto?
Nick Bonetto is Benito, I guess it is.
Yeah,
Benito. Yeah.
Now,
Benito.
Yeah. There you go.
Talk about flexibility and bend. This kid can rush the quarterback now. See, it's funny. You put his tape on, and he just moves at a different speed than a lot of the other guys we're talking about. He's sudden, explosive. He's got natural bend and flexibility. I really liked his tape a lot. I mean, look, does he need more play strength? Yeah. But you know what? He's going to be a pass rusher. I think that, and don't forget, people talk about speed to power, which he does need to work on, but a lot of times you can win with speed to power because you can get an offensive tackle off balance with your quickness off the ball. So speed to power is not just a function of being a powerful human being. There's technique involved in getting offensive tackles off balance just enough so that then when you go right into them, even if you're not a powerful man yourself, you can still move them. I think he's got the length, the sudden athleticism, the explosive bend and flexibility. I think he can become an impact pass rusher in the NFL. Again, people are going to look at his arm length. That's always an issue for some. We know that. But this kid has really explosive tape. I really like him. I mean, I think I'm curious to see where he gets drafted because this kid can rush the quarterback.
Let's finish up with a couple more edge rushers. We've got Josh Paschal from Kentucky. I hope I pronounced that correctly. And Drake Jackson from USC. Can you kind of give us?
I don't think Paschal's an edge player.
Okay.
I think Paschal's a defensive tackle in the NFL.
Tackle? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we can still get his breakdown. We've done tackles.
Really strong player. Really strong player. I think that, can he play on the outside? Maybe. I mean, look.
He's light for inside, 268. Huh.
Yeah, that's the thing. And he does, his arm length is a little short for outside. Could some see him? Could a comparison be made size-wise to Shaq Barrett? Maybe. And don't forget, Shaq Barrett for 3-4 years was not, he was not Shaq Barrett the way we know him now.
Yeah.
Barrett's pre-draft measurables were 6'1", 3/8", 251. Okay, so he's not long. Paschal was much more explosive with his vertical jump and broad jump. And don't forget, Barrett went undrafted. Paschal won't be undrafted. I think he's a really good player. I just don't know how teams will see him. My guess is some teams won't see him as an edge player, and other teams will. And I'm fascinated to see how he's deployed. But he's another guy that can play in multiple fronts. Is he seen as an edge pass rusher? I don't know.
Let me ask you this question. Solomon Thomas was a guy who blew it up at the Senior Bowl, had a very good senior year at Stanford. He was never a guy I could find a home for with the Niners. They could never figure out how to use him.
Yeah, because he's more of a confined space player than an edge player, and that's why he's never become a great player. He's kind of found his niche, and he's good at what he does. Is Paschal that kind of guy?
Right,
he's the third pick in a draft. Paschal,
right, and that was obviously a mistake. But
yeah,
you have to figure out what a guy is and isn't at this level.
And I'm not sure. But he's very strong, very strong.
Mm-hmm.
There was one other guy, Greg. I was really.
You said there were two. Oh, Drake Jackson.
Yeah, Drake Jackson. Yeah.
USC. Yeah.
Yeah. Drake Jackson is another guy that. They moved him around a lot. He's at his core an edge player, but they used him as a joker at times. They moved him around. I would say that Drake Jackson is he probably a guy he looks taller on tape. Another guy that looked taller to me, but he's 6'2" and 5/8", which is not exceedingly tall. It's not short. Good arm length, though, which, like I said, that's important to some. I think he's a flash guy based on his college tape. Quickness, burst, flexibility, explosion. He possesses the attributes needed to develop into a quality edge rusher. There were times, because he looked taller on tape, that he reminded me of Leonard Floyd coming out of Georgia, but Floyd is longer. But Jackson does have length. He looks like he has length on film, flexibility, explosiveness. I think he's a little raw and unrefined in terms of how he rushes the quarterback. So my guess is he's not going to be ready early in his career to play at the NFL level, but he has traits.
Greg, before we get out of here, just have you seen it all? Ohio State. Have you seen Tyreek Smith?
I've seen Tyreek Smith. It's funny. I'm watching him now, not while we're doing this, but I watched him in each of the last 2 years, and he is as frustrating a player to watch as there is.
Yeah, wasn't he like the number one recruit coming out of high school for them at one point? I thought he was supposed to be.
Tyler Smith was like a big time recruit coming out of high school in Cleveland, I believe. Yes, he was. And I don't know. I mean, this kid looks the part about as best as you could look. He was by the way, he's a top 50 recruit in the country. He's only had 7 sacks in 4 years at Ohio State. But man, does he look explosive and sudden when you put the tape on? He's got arm length. He looks the part. I mean, I can't answer the question because he's got speed, he's got quickness, he's got velocity. There's so much there, and it just hasn't come out yet. And I don't know if it ever will. Coaches have egos. Someone could draft him and think, I'm going to get it out of him. But he's been one of my most frustrating watches.
Interesting.
I can tell.
Is it? Do you feel? And listen, we're not getting into character or effort or personality. But when you watch him play, do you feel like he doesn't play with the motor that he has, or?
I don't think it's a motor issue.
Okay.
I don't know.
That's
don't
incredible
know why
for you.
He can't finish. I mean, boy, he really looks like a great athlete.
Huh.
I'd love to know. There's got to be a reason. I don't know anybody to add. I mean, I guess NFL coaches but Ohio State coaches, I don't know, and so I don't know why it didn't happen in Ohio State. Right. I mean, the guy had 7 sacks in 4 years.
Yeah, that's weird. for all the abilities and for the way he came in as one of their top recruits, that's very odd.
I mean, I watched him after the 2019 season, and I said, this guy's the next great Ohio State player. I mean, this guy's next year is going to blow it up. I mean, this guy's going to be great. Right. And it never happened.
Wow. That's fascinating. All right. Great stuff there. Those were our defensive ends, defensive tackles, edge rushers, however you want to group it. We will probably get a few more from you before it's over. As we discussed a little bit before the show, we'll have some spillover. We know that there are guys at certain positions that we've already done. The positions we've done, but maybe the prospect we have not yet got your evaluation on. So we will get to that in an upcoming edition of the show. So that's going to be it for this episode, this edition of the Intel with Greg Cosell. For Greg Cosell and Adam Caplan, I'm Geoff Mosher. Thanks for watching.